Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Dr. Stephanie Montgomery, and if you're joining me live, I'm so glad that you're here. If you're listening to a recording, thank you for taking the time to learn more about how you can show up for young children. The name of today's webinar is Beyond the Screen, Building Emotional Resilience in Our Youngest Children. So who is today's webinar for? Or really anyone who is working alongside young children. But to be more specific, today's topics will really center around children 0 to 3, although the things that we're talking about and the strategies that we'll unpack really are applicable for children in later years, adolescents, and sometimes even adults. This is for parents. This is for caregivers. We know that many children are staying with family, friends, and neighbors. This is for community agencies who go into the homes or do parent coaching. This is for early educators. So, really, anyone who is living alongside a young child who is trying to negotiate and understand those big emotions. So, let's get into it. So, today I want us to talk specifically about co regulation, why it matters, and why screens aren't the solution. So, you don't have to raise your hand, but think about this. Have you ever used a screen, a device to help to mitigate a meltdown? The answer is probably yes. And actually, if I think about my own adult life, many times when I'm overstressed, overtired, transitioning from work to home, or trying to really kind of calm myself, I pick up a device, I do some doom scrolling, or I am looking up something, trying to access information, and really that creates this cycle that has a lot of long term negative consequences, specifically as we talk about young children. And so that's what I want to focus on today. So let's do a little level setting. Let's talk about what is co regulation. So, co regulation is really just co, meaning working with. So, it's a parent or caregiver helping to regulate their young child's nervous system. And this is done through modeling. I talk a lot about mirror neurons because our brains and our bodies are biologically set to work in synchrony with others. And that can't be accomplished through this mechanism. So it's really hard for our bodies, our heartbeat, our nervous system to co regulate when there is a device or a barrier between us. It actually happens when you're together. So, co regulation happens when you're together with someone else and you're actually borrowing from the other person. So, that's one word that we're going to use today, co regulation, and why it's so critically important as we're helping with that arc of the tantrum that we'll get into a little bit later. So when we insert a screen or device into that meltdown or tantrum, then we're actually bypassing the opportunity for us to co regulate and for that child to learn self regulation skills that they're going to need, unless you just like meltdowns and tantrums to continue. And chances are you don't. So, co regulation is a caregiver's calm presence that helps a child's nervous system return to balance. And that's what we all want, whether that's happening in the grocery store, in the car seat coming home from preschool, in the kitchen floor when you're trying to get dinner ready for the family. So we want to help build a bridge for what they need and what you can provide. So it's really important too. This conversation is as much about your young child as it is about you as the caregiver. Really making sure that you have what you need to give for them to borrow. And so that's why screaming, threats, some other tactics, and we're going to talk about those because we've all done them, is not effective long term. Why this matters. So, when a child is born, within the first 3 years, 80 to 85% of their brain architecture is built. That's a lot happening in those first 3 years. We talk a lot about language development, and that's very important for your child's outcomes in terms of being able to read and write and be, academically where they need to be when they start school. But we don't talk as much about emotional control and self regulation. That is actually happening at its highest level. So the opportunity to do the most positive growth is happening in that first year. It's how we respond to their cries, their cues, their needs long before they can use words to communicate. So it's really, really important as a child is having a meltdown, they're actually building the framework for how they're going to respond for the rest of their life. So it's really important that we do our best to get this right. It affects their mental health, their social skills, and really their learning throughout life because chances are when they get into school and really in middle school, they're going to be confronted with a lot of opportunities where there are challenges, where they're trying to fit in, where they don't feel socially accepted, when learning a new skill or concept is really difficult for them. This is, kind of that grit that we want to develop in our children, emotional resilience, because we're going to have challenges. We're not always going to get our way. And so, how we respond to that is so very important. So, you have the opportunity to really set that path forward. And for some of us, it may be that you have the opportunity to change some parenting behaviors, some patterns of behavior that maybe you don't want to replicate. So let's do some additional level setting around tantrums and meltdowns. So I think this is really important. And I really like, and I'll get into this in just a little bit. There is an infographic called the arc of the tantrum. I really like what this researcher has laid out in labeling 5 distinct phases of a tantrum. But where I may differ on that is really around the language that we use. So, a tantrum is really about a goal oriented behavior. And so you can probably think of maybe your child, your grandchild, or you've seen it happen in public countless times. A tantrum is when the child has a goal that they're wanting and it doesn't seem like that child is able to get what they want. And so they are expressing outwardly their dissatisfaction with that. So it's motivated by something specific. So a tantrum is typically motivated by something specific. The child has some control and they actually have an ability to end that behavior. They may or may not cry when they're having a tantrum. Typically, they're able to communicate. Now, this is thinking about here if they're already able to communicate. So maybe 18 months and beyond. So this is where we may use the word defiant. They may be aggressive. This is where they may be hitting or kicking, and they want something, whether that's ice cream, a toy, maybe the computer, but they can for the most part, articulate what they want. They want a goal. Once they get that goal, then they're satisfied. So that is a different mechanism. It's a different control. It's a different outcome than what I would like to spend some time on today. What I'd like to talk about is the meltdown, because the meltdown is happening more frequently in our 0 to 3 population. Why? Well, they've been exposed to more things. They know about what they want more. With children who are older than 3, they've been exposed to more things. They know what they want and don't want. They will well define that, and they have the words and actions to use and elicit to be able to get what they want. What I want to talk about with a meltdown is 0 to 3, where they're still discovering. They don't yet know cause and effect. They don't yet know how to problem solve efficiently. And chances are they don't yet have all the words that they need to clearly communicate that. And remember now, in 0 to 3, their brain architecture is still building. So, what happens during a meltdown is actually a sensory overload. During a sensory overload is not the time to punish, to see that as a teachable moment. I like to use the word hijacked. So their limbic system, which is their kind of emotional center here, has been hijacked. To get a little more technical, in the back of the brain, you have your amygdala and hippocampus. And so when a child has a sensory overload, they may react in one of 3 ways. They may fight, and that may be crying and fighting in their body is almost like an involuntary, and they're not able to control that. You think about inhibition, they're inhibitory control. So they are responding in a fight way because they feel danger. They do not feel safe and in control. Their little brains feel danger. Another way they might respond, again, this is when there's a sensory overload and they're going into a meltdown. Another way they might respond is through flight. So they're trying to get out of there, get away from the situation. It may be arching the back, it may be stiffening up, it may be crawling away, it may be pushing away from a parent or caregiver. It may be not wanting to get into the nappy. It may be not wanting the diaper on. And I'm sure that you've seen these physical manifestations in your child or children before. So we've done fight, flight, trying to get out or away. And then another commonly used word is freeze. But when we're talking about children, it may be surrender. So surrender is when fawn is another word that can be used, but you're just surrendering, you're giving in. Sometimes we may interpret this as adults as just, oh, they finally just relaxed, and now I can move forward with what it was that I was wanting to do. But it's still important behaviors to observe and to think through how that's happening in terms of the distinct arc and how it escalates, where we have opportunity to intervene and maybe change the behavior before it escalates, or we have an opportunity on the back end to help to deregulate and to focus that attention in a new and different way. So, some key takeaways here: tantrums are about wanting, and meltdowns are saying, I can't cope. Now, think for a minute about yourself. There's probably been many, many times in your life where you just can't cope. And I've used this analogy before. It's kind of like if you're running a marathon. Number one, a marathon, I'm in high anxiety. Someone's hijacked my body. But anyway, you're running a marathon. There's a lot going on, and someone's trying to run alongside you and give you some tax advice. It's not getting through. So, in the example I used earlier about your amygdala, it's a part of the brain. It's kind of a walnut shaped, and it actually, when chemicals are released because a child is feeling a can't cope or nervous system overload, that part kind of swells up and it actually reduces blood flow into the brain. So it allows blood to be in your extremities to be able to do, it's a very primitive response, to be able to fight, flight, or fawn, but fight or flight. So it allows your body to be able to do what it needs to do because it's feeling or interpreting an unsafe environment. So it's an ability to run very quickly away or an ability to have almost supernatural strength, right? So this is swelling up and reducing blood flow into the brain. So we've got the prefrontal cortex, so the front part of the brain that is not even fully developed until your early to mid 20s, and that's kind of the air traffic controller. So that kind of supersedes and kind of tells the body what it needs to do. That isn't developed yet in your child. So it's really important to note here. So another thing to note here is the different responses. So discipline may work for a tantrum because that's where the child has control, is goal oriented, they're trying to get what they want. And so that may warrant discipline because if they are getting what they want every time and it's not safe, it's not healthy, it's not in that child's best interest, every time that we allow them to get what they want based on the behaviors that they're eliciting, we're just reinforcing that behavior. And I don't want to spend as much time on that today. I really want to talk about what we can do to help with the overload meltdowns, because that's what we're seeing more with our 0 to 3 population, that we can actually co-regulate and we can help guide alongside. And where we're seeing in this current day where screens or technology are being used as an intervention, and it's actually creating or making the problems even worse long term. So let's get into the brain and what's happening during that meltdown. So there's a sensory hijack. And so let's think about why that may happen. So at the very first phase of, if we think about this arc or the predictable patterns, So children go through a natural, rhythm, cadence within their day. So let's use an example of you've picked your 2-year-old up from mother's morning out, childcare, from grandparents' house. And so during that time, when you're driving home, it may be that you were told they didn't have a very good nap, they weren't really hungry at lunch, you might want to keep an eye on them, they may not be feeling well, variety of things. If we know that that child's conditions are not in their kind of cadence, normal predictability, then we know that there is a higher likelihood that their bodies may have to navigate more external inhibitors than they normally do. I'll kind of break that down. You know, with your child, if they haven't napped or they haven't eaten, or you need to run a couple errands after work and it's going to prolong a predictable behavior, there may be a higher likelihood that they're going to have a meltdown. So, knowing your child, trusting the predictability, and that's why I talk about it's so very important to have predictable routines. Adults need it and children need it. So, if you know that every day coming home from picking your child up, they're cranky, they're ill, they're tired, they're hungry, they just got picked up, maybe they were having playtime. When you come to pick them up every day is playtime, their socialization time, and they don't want to leave. This is just an example. You could be a stay at home mom, and you know when you wake them up from their second nap in the afternoon that they wake up kind of cranky. One, knowing your child's predictable behaviors. That's identifying that the child is, kind of preset or primed, their pump is primed, that there could be a meltdown looming. That is the time where we have the opportunity to step in to do some intervention. For example, if you know that, your child may be hungry or tired, maybe it's you come in, and before you get frantically focused on trying to get dinner ready or trying to unpack the car, trying to do something, maybe you set a timer for 5 minutes and the groceries, as long as it's not milk or yogurt, can stay in the car, but you come in and you and your child lay on the floor and you read a book together, or you lay on the floor, look at the ceiling, you do something that kind of calms her system, and then you go unpack the groceries. And then you say, when we get up from the floor, I need your help cooking dinner tonight. And maybe it's just putting broccoli on plates. Maybe it's, I need your help with, something they enjoy, stirring up, or getting out the pots and pans or getting out the Tupperware. But if you know that hunger, tiredness, overstimulation is a culprit for your child going into the meltdown, it's the parent's job or the caregiver's job to provide some different opportunities in advance of that meltdown. So now we're moving into, we provided that opportunity because we know that predictable behavior. And then we're talking through what's going to come next. What is the next activity or action that we're moving into? This is our last chance to kind of change the behaviors. So maybe they're still a little bit whiny. So maybe it's, pulling up a high chair next to where you're cooking and giving them some things that they can cook alongside with you, maybe some cups and bowls. Thinking through how you can, again, try to give them other ways that are positive and healthy to handle this overstimulation that's going on in their brain and not allowing them to basically go with the flow. Once a child gets into the meltdown, lots of different words that we can use. In some literature, they call this the tantrum. Now, I like to use tantrum when the child has the control and it's an outcome based, and meltdown when the child's nervous system is kind of hijacked and they don't have the coping skills to work through it. Nonetheless, when the child has reached that peak, here's where you're hearing screaming, crying, red face. The child isn't typically able to use words. They can't articulate what they want. You may be in tears at this point because you can't discern, you can't interpret what it is they want. This is not the time to punish. This is not the time to negotiate. This is not the time to bargain. And actually, this is not the time to introduce a screen or device. As tempting as it is, we've all been there. We're not judging. We just want to know better so we can do better. When we introduce a screen or technology here, what we've actually done is we are overriding their sensory system. It's not resolving it, it's overriding it. And what it's doing is flooding their brain with dopamine, and it gives their brain an emotional pause. So they're not actually working through to get to the other side. It's just put their nervous system in pause, and it's flooded with dopamine by this introduction with stimulation from technology. And it's also replacing the human connection. This is where co regulation comes into place. You don't have to talk, you don't have to negotiate, you don't have to bargain, but you have a calm presence. You're breathing deeply, you're counting, you're singing, you're humming, you're there for safety reasons so they don't hurt themselves or others, but you are offering up to them behaviors that will help them long term in life work through these phases. Right now, they're pretty intense. They have big emotions. They're developing their emotion system, their limbic system. They're developing this. We can't expect them to have this fully developed. They're 0 to 3 years old. So they're borrowing from us, and this is where co regulation really plays a critical role here. When we introduce technology or screens, we basically throw that out the window because they could care less about what we're doing and breathing and seeing and doing. It does provide a momentary respite for you, but it is not helping their brain long term. The dopamine loop that's created, especially when we insert it during that heightened sense of meltdown and hijacked limbic system, it is creating a dopamine loop that will make the next meltdown even more intense and more frequent. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want that. I don't want them more frequently, and I certainly don't want them more intensively because it's going to happen when I'm out and I have less opportunities, like in public places, to actually have that calm presence, to sit with them, to be able to intervene early, to provide them all that they need. So I don't want that. So at this point, the brain is associating relief only with screens and not internal regulation. The long-term consequence for that is media, emotion, regulation. And there's a lot of great work out there. You may see over my left shoulder here, The Anxious Generation, great book that follows children born in 1998 when smartphones really gave us, well, they became smart when we had the access within our hands reach to everything that we have available now. And it followed children longitudinally to see some of those outcomes with depression and social isolation. There's a lot of research out there to say we don't need to introduce it too early. Children have to learn that natural arc. So we're at the peak here, and a child is having their meltdown. Basically, they're in sensory overload. Their nervous system doesn't know what to do right now. They co regulate, they borrow from us behaviors, breathing techniques, eye contact, very important here, singing, humming, and just basically you're setting them up to be able to come back down through this arc. And when they're coming back down, you may want to give affirmations. I notice I can see your eyes now, and they're not, squinted up and closed. I notice that you're beginning to breathe with me. Oh, I love seeing the smile instead of those tears. We're talking to them and affirming how they handled this, how they worked through it is the appropriate way. And then at the very tail end of that, the last phase, that's when you can go back and talk about how did that feel? What was happening? A teachable moment. Next time, maybe we can do this. And here's the thing. I talk a lot about narrate your day, narrate, narrate, narrate. I recognize it's kind of like an iceberg. Your child may not be expressing language. They may be 9 to 15, 18 months. They're not expressing language at this time, but it's called receptive language. They are listening, they're taking in, they're understanding more than they communicate at this time. So you talking it through, what you want them to do next time, what you did during this time, validating what they did really does make an impact on future behaviors. So don't feel like, well, they can't talk yet. There's no point in me communicating. We use the word metacognition. You're actually stating out loud what you're thinking in your head and making it accessible for your child. So let's talk a little bit more about every meltdown is an opportunity. So each supported meltdown builds neural architecture for your child to be able to handle stress the next time. You are literally wiring your child's brain for resilience, and that's what we all want. What co regulation looks like in practice: staying calm yourself, your nervous system is guiding theirs. Provide physical presence, so cuddles, quiet talking, safe spaces, removing as much overwhelming stimuli as possible to the degree that you can, and being patient and letting the wave break naturally. It will end. Now, this is different again from a tantrum that we talked about earlier. Remember, a tantrum is goal oriented, they're wanting to get something. There's a specific thing that they're wanting. Children are pretty steadfast and stubborn. They can do that for a very long time, and they will continue to do that as long as the behavior that they're eliciting is getting what they want. Here we're talking about a meltdown, sensory overload, nervous system. It's something they have to do. I mean, we're biologically created to work through this and learn how to navigate it for our future selves. So the payoff in doing this is stronger emotional regulation skills, better social connections, improved focus and problem solving, and a foundation for lifelong mental health. Some key takeaways here. So, in our last few minutes, key takeaways: screens dismantle the regulation process, co regulation builds it. Short term relief with screens versus long term resilience. I'm going to include some research articles if you're interested in that, some resources, and a couple of different resources that you may want to check out. Final thought: the hard work of being present in your child's meltdown is the most important investment you can make in their emotional future. Join me next time on School, where we navigate the early years.